What I want to do tonight, just for a few moments, is continue with James Hillman's In Search. As I wrote in the Shabbat Thought, this was a life-changing book for me. A professor in rabbinical school more or less handed it to me. I began reading it, and it was one of those moments, like when I was in college and I read Gershom Sholom's Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism. When I read this book, although I had heard of Jung and I think pieced together enough of what Jung taught, this book really is a book that pierces right into you, the profundity and depth of Jungian archetypal psychology, especially as interpreted by James Hillman. Now, you see in the preface to the book, Hillman initially wrote this book from the series of talks and workshops with Protestant clergy, where Hillman's advice to them was, don't cede the work of the psyche to clinical psychologists. Clinical psychologists have great work to do, but in a program of clinical psychology, it would be rare to have several classes on the soul. On the other hand, when one is trained, let's say in certainly Jewish and Christian clergy, I'm not sure about the training of Islamic clergy, but in Jewish and Christian clergy, where we study Psalms, we study Proverbs, so many other parts of our tradition, there's including other parts of the Bible as well, but I'm going to especially think of Psalms and Proverbs. There's an unrelenting seriousness about what we call the nefesh sometimes, meaning soul, ruach, which means spirit, but also means soul, neshama, which means breath, but also means soul. You find these terms appearing over and over again, and they've drawn the attention of what people call theologians. I don't like that word very much because the word theologian makes it sound as if they're only trying to get a logos of theos, meaning some kind of theory of the divine. And, I much prefer the idea of religious phenomenology, meaning going into the experience of religion, going into the experience of the knowing of the divine, and the soul being you might say the aspect of the inner life that can know the divine. So two things I want to do tonight was just read a little bit of what Hillman says in the book, and then apply the book to part of our discussion from Tuesday night, our class on the spiritual, on the religious background of Leonard Cohen's poetry. By the way, I've had many people ask, can I sign up for the class late and can I send them links? What I've decided to do is listen to the earlier classes and just create a set of podcasts on the earlier classes, more or less what the discussion was like, but I will reiterate what we talked about. So those of you who would like to study the spiritual and religious background of the poetry of Leonard Cohen, God willing, we'll have some teaching soon. So let me just read a little bit of Hillman. Hillman is, first of all, trying to discuss what he means by soul. So he says here, thinking about analytical psychology, the first thing that the patient wants from an analyst is to make him aware of his suffering and draw the analyst into the world of experience. Experience and suffering are terms long associated with soul. Soul is not a scientific term. It appears very rarely in psychology today. But the term psyche, which is the Greek word for soul, and soul can be used interchangeably, although there's a tendency to escape the ambiguity of the word soul by recourse to the more biological, more modern psyche. Soul is metaphysical, romantic. It shares frontiers with religion. Exploration of the word shows that we are not dealing with something that can be defined, and therefore soul is not really a concept, but a symbol. Symbols, as we know, are not completely within our control, so that we are not able to use the word in an unambiguous way, even though we take it to refer to that unknown human factor which makes meaning possible, which turns events into experiences, and which is communicated in love. The soul is a deliberately ambiguous concept, resisting all definition, in the same manner as do all ultimate symbols. So a phrase I often use, the soul is where events become experiences, is straight from James Hillman. So he adds to that, he's quoting an earlier work of his, where the soul has a religious concern. I want to say a word about that very briefly. When I studied religion in college, I was very fortunate to fall into a school of religion where religion was not studied as comparative religion. When people ask me, well, what did you study? I say religion. They said, oh, so comparative religion. We didn't study comparative religion. We understood the structure of religion. We understood the inner life of religion. We studied theory of religion as an inner life experience and as it produced our life together. So, for example, Paul Tillich was a core book that I read in college. It was not about Christianity. In fact, Tillich has stepped beyond traditional Protestant theology and tried to understand religion as that which helps us connect with ultimate reality, and then how our lives are built on the ultimate concerns of the soul. Now, of course, for reasons that we all understand, religion ceased functioning that way because religion was associated with dogma, meaningless rote teachings and liturgy, nothing reaching into the soul. So people have left religion, but and already happening, by the way, when Hillman wrote this book in 1967. But Hillman said, you can leave religion, but you're not going to ever leave the concerns of the soul. And what Hillman was bemoaning was that we have souls that inherently are seeking meaning, but we don't have a place to do that. And his call to Protestant clergy back in 1967 was, don't try to do what the clinicians do, because you have plenty to do to explore for the modern person the world of the soul. Of course, Carl Jung wrote in 1931, Modern Man in Search of a Soul. As I've been rereading the book, and especially applying it to my two wisdom classes on Wednesday nights, and each of the classes independently has arrived at what I'll call depth work. In one, some of the deepest feelings and emotions of the soul that can cause us great inner distress and how to overcome it. And in the other class, authentic depth work, meaning moving into archetypal psychology. It's interesting for me. I began classes in different spaces, and they've somewhat moved themselves together. It's been a very, very deep experience. And again, I hope to put some of this in a podcast to keep everybody abreast of what we're doing. So this, for me, connected in the class on Leonard Cohen on Tuesday night, and we just began reading the Book of Mercy, which I read partly, as you know, during the high holidays, but we never really had time to study these poems. So one thing that's happening in the class on Cohen is we're really slowing down and studying this poetry. So I want to read just a little bit of number one. I call it Psalm 1 in his 50 poems Book of Mercy, which I believe is a meditation in the month of Elul for the high holidays. He says, I stopped to listen, but he did not come. Now, it's not exactly sure what he's referring to, but it's that moment, I think, when you're aware of your being. When you're aware that we are inevitably trudging toward our deaths. That you know you don't have all the time in the world. And something calls out to you that says to you, stop. What we're supposed to do on Shabbat, stop for a moment. One can say, hear the word of God, hear the word of the soul. But we stop for a moment. But he did not come, not sure who the he is. So Leonard says, I began again with a sense of loss. As this sense deepened, I heard him again. So that voice either reaching from the divine or out from the soul. Then he says brilliantly, I stopped stopping and I stopped starting. And I allowed myself to be crushed by ignorance. And then he says, this was a strategy and didn't work at all. There's something very profound here. It's as if when, Leonard writes in many different voices, of course. The stratagem of the person who says, I was crushed by ignorance, and the whole time the Yetzer Hara is chuckling and saying, yeah, but you don't act like that. you still act like you have all the answers. Even your skepticism is an answer. Even your being crushed by ignorance is a kind of an answer. And then the self-admission of the poet is, that was just a strategy. So as what goes through the poetry, it's as if Leonard is unlayering one part of the soul after another, one stratagem after another, one avoidance after another. He says, much time, years were wasted in such a minor mode. And then truly haunting words, because you can see now, it's like an addict, he's hit rock bottom. What does he have to offer? Either the soul crying out to be heard and crying out to be lived into our lives. In the Hasidic tradition, we believe that the soul is in exile and yearning to be redeemed, not as something that we've pushed away, but something we call out. So now this is Leonard, as it were, hitting rock bottom in this first poem. I bargain now. I offer buttons for his love. I beg for mercy. Slowly he yields. Haltingly he moves toward his throne. It's on the high holidays where God makes the movement from the throne of judgment to the throne of mercy. Reluctantly, the angels grant to one another permission to sing. In a transition so delicate it cannot be marked. The court is established on beams of golden symmetry. And once again, I am a singer in the lower choirs, born 50 years ago to raise my voice this high and no higher. So Leonard wrote this book when he was 50 in 1984. It has 50 psalms. It's truly an extraordinary book. And as we study the poem, I thought about Hillman. I thought about Leonard. I thought about what it means to do depth work. I thought about our community, and I just realized all over again that one of our major paths to depth is the Word. This caused me to go back to and read a little bit of the Baal Shem Tov's Amud HaTfilah, the Pillar of Prayer, which is based on Genesis 6:18, if I'm not mistaken, where God says to Noah to put a tzohar into the ark. Now, what is a tzohar? The rabbis debate whether it was a gemstone that emitted light, or whether it was a portal, a window, as it were, in the ark, facing above into the sky. Now, as you heard me teach many times before, I'm sure I'll teach it again, the word teva in Hebrew, which means ark, as in Noah's ark, is also the Hebrew word for a word, not the meaning of the word, which is a milah, but rather the structure of the word, how the word looks, as it were, how the word sounds. So when it says, put a window in the ark, the Hasidim translate this as, put a window in the word. Now, this probably comes close to a definition of Hasidic thought. Something when people ask me, what is Hasidism? Aside from the history, the garb, the text, this is actually the core of Hasidism. You put a window in the Word, and you look through the window with your soul. And when you look down into the Word, according to Baal Shem Tov, you see worlds and angels and souls and the divine. So try to imagine we put a window onto the Word, and you look through the window, and you look down into the Word, into the heart of the Word. And what do you see down there? You see an infinite world of souls and angels and worlds and the divine. So this practice of looking deeply into words, deeply into the inner life of words, is how we study the prayer book, is how we study Torah, is how we study Talmud and Midrash and the Zohar. And I think we have to add Leonard's book to the as a core work in the history of Jewish liturgy. For me, this book is a holy text. And this book also asks of us to take each word, each phrase, and put a window on it and look through the window with our souls and allow our souls to connect to the deeper inner life of the Word. And then the inner life of the Word reaches back up into us. And what it means for us to study any sacred poetry, of course, including Rilke, but more specifically our sacred text, the Bible, the Talmud, the Midrash, the mystical text, is an activity of bringing our souls into the Word and the Word speaking into our souls. So what happens in a transition so delicate it cannot be marked? You might say the court, meaning experiencing the majestic mercy of the divine, the majestic love of the divine, is established on beams of golden symmetry. And then we suddenly find ourselves that we are the singers. We are singing the song of the soul, singing the lower choirs, not the angelic choirs, but the lower choirs down here with each other. And Leonard self-reflectively said, 50 years ago, to raise my voice this high and no higher. And of course, this is just the first poem in the book. And as we move through the book, his voice goes higher and higher and higher. So I'm turning toward, on our Friday nights, of reading a bit of Hillman each week, reading a bit of Leonard Cohen each week. We'll move into Hanukkah. I might change tacks then. Tomorrow we'll be taking a deep look at the archetypal psychology of Jacob again. There's 3 parshiot that are so beyond belief rich in archetypal psychology last week, this week, and the next week on the greatest archetypal figure in the Bible, which is Jacob.